Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar on delivering and maintaining change in our newly remote world. My name is Murray, and I will be moderating the webinar. Before we dive into the content, I wanted to quickly go through a few housekeeping items. First of all, please know that you're on mute. So if you have any questions during the webinar, you can use the chat function on your GoToWebinar panel to submit questions at any time. We will have a quick Q&A at the end, and if for some reason we do not get to your question, please know that we will follow up with you. This is being recorded and will be distributed to all attendees. And then lastly, we do have a couple polls that we will be launching during the webinar. They will pop up on your screen, so please select the answer or answers that best describe your organization. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to our panelists, Tammy Srome and Alex Tay. So Tammy, take it away.
Thanks, Jillian. Hi, everyone. Welcome. So today we're talking about delivering and maintaining change in our newly remote world. And you notice the asterisk on newly there. That's because throughout our webinar time today, you're going to hear different highlights of how, for Collaborative Solutions, this is how we've been operating since the very start and how we can support you in those type of transitions as well. Right. So in talking to you today, I'll have Alex joining me. Again, my name is Tammy Srome. I'm a consultant in the organizational change and training practice here at Collaborative. I have 10 years of experience in education, training, and change management. And Alex, go ahead.
Thanks, Tammy. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name is Alex Tay. I'm a director in our organizational change and training practice here at Collaborative. I've been in the Workday ecosystem for the past 10 years. The last 7 of that has been at Collaborative, working in our organizational change and training practice. So happy to talk with you guys today.
Awesome. So before we get into our formal agenda, we just wanted to take a moment to go through some context of why we're here today and what's our purpose. So in this digital transformation space, we're noticing a few trends, one of which is companies shifting to that remote workforce and the likelihood that that's going to remain kind of permanent over time. We also see an increase in those support tickets ever since these COVID-19 changes have been taking place. And also end users who are seeking support, they really are leaning towards a preference for self-service materials they have access to on demand. They can use it at the point in time that they need it. So with these trends that are happening in this virtual space at Collaborative, the great news is it's not new for us, right? Virtual is our normal. So alongside that new normal, we're equipped to help you with those changes as well. So in our change management practice, about 80 to 100% of the time, we're already delivering virtually. So we're equipped to help you with those changes, and we're going to highlight a lot of examples today to go through how that looks different for different projects. All right, so given that context now, let's take a look at our agenda for our time together here. So we'll walk through an overview of Collaborative Solutions. We're going to take a look at how we drive digital transformation. Then we'll get into our approach to change management, how that can be applied in person and remotely. We'll leave you with some best practices for delivering remotely, as well as closing thoughts. And there'll be some time for questions and answers at the end as well.
All right, so a little bit about Collaborative Solutions. If you're on this webinar, you likely already know a little bit about us, but just in case, Collaborative Solutions is a finance, HR, and student cloud transformation consultancy. And you'll see in this infographic a whole bunch of different information about who we are and what we do and the different partners and technologies that we work with. Often at the core of the transformations we're doing for our customers, they have Workday as a finance, HR, and student platform. But I want to talk a little bit about some of the other things that are on here that you might not know about Collaborative. So specific to the work that Tammy and I do and the team that we work with is change management. You see that right at the center of this infographic. This is who we are as an organization. When we think about digital transformation, cloud transformation, we know that change management and user adoption is at the center of it. So we've built a practice around that. We'll talk a little bit more about that practice in just a few minutes. The other thing I'll draw your attention to are the 2 green boxes on the right, where we're not just about technology deployments. We're about true transformation. And that includes more than just the systems, more than just the processes that are involved. It includes a strategic planning approach that takes you through all different stages of your transformation cycle, from before you get started with the technology to what happens after you go live, and to the different partnerships that we have. So you'll see a few different platforms that we partner with. We'll talk a little bit more about App Learn Adopt throughout the presentation, and how we leverage that to really push our change management approach forward. The last thing I want to talk about on this slide, and if we go back one real quick, the last thing I'll talk about is all of these awards across the bottom, and I've quite frankly stopped keeping track of which ones are there because we update them all the time as we get more, but this really speaks to who we are as a company. Consistently rated as the best workplace for women, for millennials, in mid-sized consulting, by all sorts of different organizations. That's how our founders have built our company. That's who we are as an organization, and that's how we also care about our customers. So now on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about what we actually do. So the words digital transformation, full service, HR, enterprise, business strategy, those are great words. That is exactly what we do. But the meat and potatoes of what that actually means is represented by this circle on the right. And at the core really is the technology that drives digital transformation. What you do for your HR system, your financial system, your student systems if you're in education, payroll, and supply chain. But again, as I mentioned earlier, we know that wrapped around all of that is a strategy, it's a plan, it's analyzing your business, analyzing your organization, your operations, and understanding how digital transformation serves it. And then wrapped around all of that is what we'll really be talking about today, is that gray circle of digital adoption. Our experience with these digital transformation tools and these software platforms is that pushing things out to our workforce means getting them engaged in it, making sure that they're adopting it and using the systems we push out. We're going to talk a lot today in reference to our specific topic about what that means for a remote workforce, and not just how do you do it in spite of working remotely, but actually how does working remotely help promote and become an advantage to the way that you drive digital adoption throughout your transformation.
All right, so we want to hear from you. So for our first poll that Jillian mentioned earlier, we want to get to know you a little bit and ask, has your organization experienced an increase in or a shift to this type of remote work since March? I'll give you a few moments to think through and answer that on the polls on your screen. All right, so taking a look at the poll here, I think it's a resounding yes as our answer to this one. I definitely thought we'd have some yeses. I thought there would be a mix. Really actually encouraged to see, in large part, 100% of us have seen that shift as well. So as you can imagine, Collaborative is noticing and feeling that shift. So we want to give a quick touch point on how, even though we're seeing and feeling that shift as well, our projects in large part have stayed completely on track, on time, and with their scheduled go lives. Just 3.5% of projects have actually paused in relation to COVID-19, and only 1.5% of projects are extended due to COVID-19. And when we say due to COVID-19, it's often not a direct relation. It can have something to do with the actual resourcing and overall bandwidth. So what we're noticing here is that we're staying on track with our typical numbers that we would expect to see. We actually don't have any projects canceled due to those type of shifts as well. So this is encouraging news, and we can help keep projects on track. So we're going to take a look at how we can successfully do that and how we drive that digital transformation piece.
All right, so you guys have gotten a little bit of context about who Collaborative is so far. It seems like all of us have seen a shift to remote, and Tammy just shared a little bit of information about how we've kept the vast majority of our projects on track, despite everything going on in the world right now, a global pandemic and everything else. And so I want to share a little bit more and dive a little bit deeper into what digital transformation actually is, right? So I talked a little bit earlier about your HR platform, your finance platform, the different technologies that are in place. Digital transformation is a lot more than just the technology though, right? So we have our processes, how you actually go about business, the technologies that I just mentioned, your data, making sure your data is secure and accurate, and all the different ways that you govern that. But then the big piece for digital transformation for us is the people side of it. So that top left quadrant in this circle is what we're really going to focus on today. We know at Collaborative, all 4 of these segments are important parts of your digital transformation, but we're really going to look at how we handle the people side of things, what that means to us, and how our approach has really driven the numbers that Tammy just shared of keeping 98.5% of our projects moving forward towards success, despite what's been going on in the world since March. So the next circle you'll see is the same one that we talked about a little bit earlier, and I just want to revisit it really quickly again to mention we're really talking about digital adoption here. So if you think about those 4 quadrants I just mentioned of process, technology, data, and people, the gray circle around there of digital adoption, that's all about the people aspect. That's the work that Tammy and I's team in organizational change and training does, and that's what we'll focus on today. So let's zoom in a bit on that gray circle and show you another circle of what that actually looks like within our practice. So this describes our OC&T practice. OC&T is organizational change and training to us, and how Collaborative has built this practice. So we're really proud to be a part of a practice that is fully in-house and fully dedicated to change management. This isn't a bolt-on service for us. This isn't something that we do on the side or that our technical and functional consultants just have kind of layered into their additional work. We have a team of over 50 people that only do this at Collaborative. And the tangible stuff that you'll see when you think about change management and training is the stuff in the center. Your training materials, the communications that are going out, digital enablement in terms of using different tools to really push your technology out. Those are the things that you can touch and see and feel when you think about change management. But wrapped around that is that strategic planning, the advisory service that we talked about before, and I mentioned our infographic. How do we think about our planning and strategy and enabling all the right groups, enabling all the right sponsors to get our organizations ready to go through that transformation? And then in the purple segment at the bottom, how do we sustain that past go live? Just getting to go live isn't enough for us. We want to make sure that all of our customers, as they go through their transformation, are able to sustain that and maintain it and continue it going forward well after they get to day 1 of go live. We use, again, some supporting technologies to do all of this. Workday is at the core of a lot of our transformations because of its central role in HR and finance. But then Applearn and Adopt there at the bottom, we'll talk a little more about that. That's a digital adoption platform we use to accelerate our change management services here at Collaborative. So our folks are certified in both of those technologies. We're trained in a base change management methodology called ProSci, and our job is to weave all of those together for our customers to really think about how do you use Workday or Salesforce or whatever the other technology is at the core of your transformation. But then how do you use a digital adoption platform like Adopt to accelerate the change management process into all those new core technologies? So we'll talk more about both of these as we go. We'll dive a little bit further into Adopt and the different parts and pieces involved there as we get into some of the examples later on. But just to close out this introductory section with a few more numbers. At the very, very top of the presentation, Tammy talked to you guys a little bit about some of the changes that we see our customers going through these days. So moving to a remote environment, seeing an increase of tickets due to people working from home, all those types of things. The important thing to know about these numbers, these aren't related to COVID. This is related to how a platform like Adopt and a strong change management effort can really push business results in your organization. So it's not just that shifting to remote is causing issues, it's that shifting to remote invites us to use technologies that actually in and of themselves drive better business success, drive better results, drive efficiency, lower service tickets, things like that. So we're really, really excited about sharing this with you guys today, sharing some of our results and examples with you, and showing you how we got to some of these numbers using different technologies.
Awesome, thank you, Alex. All right, so let's dive into our approach for change management. So at CS, in our change management practice, we really focus on that people side of change. So we work alongside the project team, we're embedded with the functional team to really get to know what the change impacts are, working with our customers to understand exactly who the key stakeholders are going to be. And then our goal is to really help them transition from that current state to the future state. As part of managing that change, we have an in-depth analysis of different needs, whether they're communication, training, and looking at different ways that technology is used. So across these 3 areas, there are several intricacies, lots of different processes and tasks that take place. For purposes of the webinar today, we're going to focus mainly on that in-person versus remote work to help increase the end user adoption and have a positive experience with that, as well as gaining self-sufficiency. So let's look at how we do that. We're going to take a look at some examples for in-person or remote. So no matter how you're delivering whichever logistic kind of opportunity you have there are a few considerations that you want to make. So first and foremost, we want to think through those project tasks, remaining on schedule, remaining on your timeline, making sure that you're reaching certain milestones and staying within budget, making sure you have really defined responsibilities. Alongside that, there's considerations to make in terms of your method and tone of communications, what your meeting logistics might look like, and along all of those, you want to keep your teams engaged, building that team rapport, keeping everyone interested, and really participating at a high level. So the fun part about these considerations is that you would likely go through this thought process regardless of if it's in person or remote. So let's just pretend for a moment you kind of cover the title on this slide here. You wouldn't really know if you were planning for in person or remote. So essentially, you're going through that same planning process no matter what type of format you're using, and some of the minute pieces may look a little bit different. So let's get into a few more examples of how we accomplish this. So here we have our colorful road, our highlight of a high-level change management deliverables and key processes as part of a project here. So you'll notice on the far left side that discovery and planning, and then as we continue down the road, it will get closer into that training and sustainment that Alex spoke about a little bit ago. So let's think back to that early slide where we said 80 to 100% of the time, we are already working remotely. So how does that fit in here? That very first part, discovery and planning, we typically look to be on site for architect workshops, discovery sessions, customer confirmation sessions, really getting to know you and the end users and change impacts. And then further down our colorful road here for training delivery, we would typically have some sort of in-person delivery in relation to training delivery as well. Now that can look different for every customer. So we have already done 100% fully remote deployments as well. And we've also been on site more. So we already have built into our processes switching between those two formats. So let's think about an example for that discovery and planning that you see on the far left. So for an architect workshop, we usually attend functional architect workshops and also host our change management architect workshops. So that likely takes place in person, but especially with these COVID changes, we've seen all of that moving to remote. So when a functional architect workshop changes to remote, they'll decide their best case logistics and we'll join in and support them. For change management and training, we can be flexible with our architect workshop sessions. So one example that we've seen be really beneficial, especially in this space and time, is taking our full 1 day or 2 day, full day meeting and breaking that up into smaller chunks. So roughly 2-hour meetings across the course of a week, or maybe even stretching out to 2 weeks. That way everyone's fully engaged, we're getting the information we need, we still have opportunities for icebreakers and team rapport building without necessarily taking up the full span of the day, working just through a computer together. So moving forward, we're going to continue down our colorful road here and look at some more examples in depth. So here we see sponsorship and change champions. So I'll give you a quick overview to lead you into our examples for those. So for sponsorship, this is where we're looking for that project sponsor to be active, visible, and vocal. They're really driving the credibility, spreading key messages, and gaining interest from the organization to really listen to that type of leader. For change champions, this is a type of network or group of people that are an extension of the change management team. They're getting out there and leading the change, promoting change from within, delivering key messages, and then they can also serve as a feedback loop. So they're reporting back to the change management team and letting us know, how are the communications going? What type of frequently asked questions are we hearing? And how can we best meet end user needs? So for each of these, I'm sure you can imagine different type of in-person settings where a sponsor may be leading a roadshow, change champions might be meeting in person, and then also speaking face-to-face with the local groups that they're reaching. So when we have to move to remote, this shift can actually happen pretty easily. Change champions in an everyday setting, even pre-COVID-19, sometimes are geographically dispersed and might be meeting virtually anyway. So I'm going to give an example from Northwest Arkansas Community College, who did have to shift to fully remote work. So they were able to take their Change Champion network and reposition those meetings to take place fully virtually. And then to keep interest high, they actually invited the sponsor to present at a Change Champion meeting and run a demo for them of Workday mobile functionality. So this type of process helped show some high confidence that the project is still on track. Even though we've made these changes, you can see our leadership is still involved. They're heavily communicating the plan to stay on time and really gaining that interest by having the sponsor as a key speaker. Okay. And then Alex, I know you have another example for us as well.
Yeah, so kind of extending something Tammy said earlier about Change Champions and being able to operate that network remotely. We had a customer, this was a manufacturing customer in North America, a large name brand customer, and they had a situation where they had champions that they wanted to engage locally. They wanted to really use their champion network to drive that peer communication, that peer network out there. But their champions, because they're a manufacturing company, were all located in independent plants. So they had a network for their business where they might manufacture part of their product in one place or one stage of their product and then truck it up the road to another facility that specialized in the next stage of production and manufacture it there. That meant that if they were using peer champions, they couldn't easily move them from facility to facility. They couldn't easily bring them into the corporate headquarters. Even though these folks might have been only a mile or two away from each other, they couldn't put them all in one room at a regular basis all the time without losing productivity to their core business. So what they did was they looked out and said, okay, how do we embrace this fact that we're all working close to each other, but not quite with each other and can't get in person? And how do we leverage technologies in the natural workspaces we're already using to really drive things forward and actually use it to our advantage? So it just so happened that this company at the same time had just adopted Google Apps. So they're already moving and looking at cloud software. They're trying to get away from Office 365. But they looked at what they had and they said, hey, Google Apps has something called Google Sites and Google Groups. And so we can lean into that and use a transformation we've already started to move our champions into this digital space. Now you could do the same thing if you're on Microsoft with Office 365 and SharePoint and Teams and all different types of technologies. The exact platform doesn't work. What was really telling about this organization was they looked at the digital tools they already had at their disposal and they said, we're going to lean into it. We're not going to look at this as a barrier. We're going to look at this as, hey, we've got all these tools that we should be excited about because it now gives us the opportunity to engage our change network across all of our multiple locations in real time or not in real time, depending on their shifts and times of day they are engaged, and bring them together. So their Google site ended up being this communal space where all their champions could engage, share ideas, receive communications. They did some remote calls, but quite frankly, they ended up moving to a fully virtual experience where a third shift change champion could come in, figure out what the messages were for that week, that day, see some feedback from first and second shift earlier in the day, and apply all of that to their stand-up meeting where they're being asked to communicate things out. It ended up being a really, really great model, a good one that they actually continue to use past go live. And the last point I'll make is I just said past go live because these folks went live probably 18 months to 2 years ago. So this was well before COVID, well before the forced move to a remote workplace. They were already looking at that time without those external pressures from the world of saying, how do we do things better remotely? How do we allow people to engage on a daily or weekly basis instead of pulling them out of their natural workspace and once a month coming in for an artificially created meeting? So a really, really powerful way that they leverage technology even without the external influences to lean into that remote environment, even when they didn't have to.
Excellent, thanks, Alex. So these examples really just drive the point of keeping that momentum going. And you may have already yourself experienced some of these methods. So as we get into some more examples, just keep in mind if there are some methods that you've already seen or heard of, or that you can relate to in your organization as well. So moving into some examples for communications. So for communications, you're really looking to plan out for any project your key communications so that you get the right messages to the right people at the right time. So take just a moment to look at some of the communication methods we have listed on this slide. And I'm sure you've noticed they're already virtual, right? In large part, we're already going to be delivering communications in a remote type of way. That's just the type of world we live in now. There are times where you may have a type of print-based communication that someone might see in person in an office type of setting, but in large part, you'll see that they're virtual communications. So when you have to shift to remote type of work, what you're looking to do is analyze that existing communication plan and just thinking through the tone and content and purpose and making sure you make adjustments that meet whatever the need is at that time, whether it be due to COVID or for a different type of reason. Just taking a look back and recalibrating on that plan, what's going to work best for your end users at that point in time. Right, so some examples you see here are, on that project website, maybe updating what that content looks like, or even pushing out bite-sized information on social media or through push notifications. So I'm going to pass it to Alex for another great example for our communications.
Yeah. So this example is from actually a current customer. They're in the Northwest United States, and they started their deployment in January of this year. So what that meant was they were a Workday first deployment, and they finished their system design sometime in February. And then if you think about the timeline of the world, that means that right after they finished system design, being in the Northwest United States, some of our first COVID cases being in Seattle, they were very quickly impacted by some of the very first shutdowns that we saw. So during March, as they were sort of working towards their design confirmation sessions, we sat down with them and we had a conversation and said, how is this going to impact our project? Their leadership very quickly said, we don't want to miss a beat. We want to stay on timeline. We need to adjust the way that we need to adjust. I'm happy to report that right now they're still tracking towards their original go live date. They've not missed a beat. So how do they do that as it relates to communications? Well, we had been working with them up to the point of shifting to remote to design a communications plan like you would with any change management effort. It had a lot of things. It had a lot of things in here, a project website, emails, different social media things that they used internally and things like that. But we were also working out of their corporate headquarters where a majority of their people were. And so we had things like desktops and putting tabletop cards in the lunchroom and maybe using the digital billboards around, things like that. The things that you would typically see in a technology deployment in a workplace like that. Well, obviously all the in-person stuff we had to pull off the table. We also had to pull back a little bit because in March and April, it became very, very critical for them to put COVID-19 communications first. That was understandable. They had to take care of their workforce, let them know what was going on. So we eased off of Workday communications a little bit during that time. But while we eased off, we were planning. We were thinking about how are we going to bring it back? What's going to happen? How are we going to make sure that as the workforce settles down from their transition to working from home, they understand that all of the work they had been putting into this project, especially within their HR teams, was still moving forward and they were still committed to that work. So the way they brought it back was, one, we of course just adjusted the communications plan to any of the in-person and physical engagement things. We just shifted off and made into digital formats or just figured out ways to accommodate those elsewhere. But they thought really creatively about, and again, I think I'm starting to repeat myself a little bit, how to embrace that remote working, how to say, here are the advantages of it instead of treating it like a barrier. And that's the number one message that as I thought through all the examples and preparing for this presentation, I keep coming back to. They worked with their sponsors and their executive sponsors for their CHRO and CFO. And they said, you know what, we want to lean into this. We're already trying to do more video in our workplace. So can we get you guys on video? Don't send an email out. Don't send a postcard to people's homes or things like that, or in a stand-up meeting. Let's record a video and send it out as your way of saying, this project's still moving forward. We're going to be stronger for it, and check out the way that we can continue to work from home. And they intentionally made it so that those leaders filmed those videos from their natural home office. So they didn't create a fake Zoom background or anything like that. They were literally sitting in their living room, sitting at the kitchen table where they were working as they had shifted out of their office environment. Say, hey, we're here too, we're working from home too, and we're being productive, and we're going to stay on track. We're going to keep things moving. So they ended up being able to deliver not just the same messages in a different format, but actually what ended up being a more powerful message in a different format by saying, as leadership, as a project team, we're in the same place that the entire rest of our workforce is, but this is going to help us, this project is going to help us, and this transformation is going to help us be better for it. So again, a lot of the communication efforts are not just about how do we convert things over, how do we take a stand-up meeting and figure out how to deliver it via GoToWebinar or GoToMeeting, but how do we use that shift and use that technology to show an advantage of a digital workplace and a digital transformation and operating in the cloud in a way that we haven't before.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. So in that example, I'm sure many of you can relate to that as well, feeling a shift in communications based on need, where you potentially have some change fatigue already going on or information overload. So thinking through some of those adjustments in that example, and some other options to consider are potentially less communications, but more in-depth type of content, or even more frequent communications, and maybe they're micro communications and just giving quick burst of important information when your end users are needing those. Another point that I want to just highlight here that Alex kind of touched on as well is planning ahead. So we saw that shift when COVID happened. So your communication plan is a really great place to think ahead to what happens when we shift back. What's the next step? And how can we use our communications to really make that a smooth transition as part of our digital transformation? All right, so moving along here, a little bit more on communications and training.
Yeah, so extending that last point, particularly about change fatigue and communications fatigue, all of our people, the workforces in your organization, definitely the workforce, our fellow colleagues at Collaborative, as we've gone through the past few months, we've experienced a lot of intake of communication. There was input from our companies based on how are we adjusting to working from home? How are we protecting each other from a public health standpoint? How are we adjusting to this new working environment? From our friends and from our colleagues in our communities about how we're responding to things. From the news media and social media. There's all of this input coming to all of us right now in a way that is part of our just modern digital age, but also there's a lot going on in the world, so there's a lot to consume right now. And that fatigue is a very real thing. So one of the things that we have to consider is how do we, from our digital transformation project standpoint, right? One sliver of what an individual person might be focused on at this point in time, how do we make sure that those messages get to the right place when they need to, but don't overwhelm the person? And this is where a digital adoption platform like Adopt comes into play as well. So, so this is where we really, really want to value leveraging technology to make things right, deliver things in the right way for the people that we are working with. So what you have on screen right now, this is a screenshot of the Adopt platform. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means. You'll see in the background, if you've worked with Workday, you'll recognize that Workday's in the background. These aren't overlaid screenshots. This is literally what a person would see when they log into Workday if we've enabled that Adopt platform for them. So as a platform, Adopt integrates with the core platforms like Workday or Salesforce and other core technologies. And it does two things for us. So one is it does allow us to track everything that's going out from our change program, whether it's communications, training items, how much they engage with the different help points we put in the system, so we can really focus on the things that are working for people. That's all really, really good stuff, and I wish I had an extra hour to talk to you guys about Adopt, and there are additional webinars and things that we'll mention later on if you want to dive deeper into that particular platform. But the thing I want to highlight about Adopt is part two, which is the shift in an approach to communications and training it allows us to make. Where a traditional approach to communications and training without a digital adoption tool or outside of a cloud transformation, where you're just thinking old school communications and training, it's very much center out, right? So it's a project team saying, I think the workforce needs to hear this message now. I'm going to click send and it's going to go out to them. Or I'm going to host this town hall and it's going to go out to them. Or I want these people to learn this particular skill or item now. And so I'm going to deliver this course, or I'm going to push out this e-learning or whatever it might be. Where an adoption platform helps is it changes that perspective to, instead of saying, I'm going to push it out now, it allows the end user, that employee or that manager, to say, I'm coming into Adopt and now I'm going to receive the information that's valid and relevant to me right now. So when a person launches Workday for first time, they're greeted by this screen. Obviously, there's a little bit of like a stock image Tron thing going on there, but that would be why one of those videos from an executive, something relevant to your organization or something like that. This is all customizable in the message. And now when they're in the mindset, in the frame of saying, all right, what is this Workday thing? Let me get into it. I've been asked to go in there and update my emergency contacts. Now they're in the right mindset to consume that information when it matters to them, when they're receptive to it. And it boosts the adoption because we're no longer overwhelming them and adding Workday or adding the digital transformation project in alongside everything else that's going on. We're saying, hey, we're going through this project, go here and engage with it. And when they're engaging, that's when they get to consume all the details. So changing that push intervention to a pull intervention from a change perspective is really, really powerful for us. It helps us address the fatigue. And again, this is an additional example of where we're leveraging the technologies available to us that are really, really relevant now in a remote workplace. But the fact is they've been relevant. They've been ways to continue promoting and engaging the different ways that we engage with our workforce and engage with our people and our users as they adopt a system. And they're even more important now that that shift to a remote and distance environment is being forced on us. So a little more about Adopt, and again, we'll round up the day with a couple of additional links to this because it's a really great platform that I hope you guys will learn more about.
All right, so getting into a little bit more on training delivery. So as a natural part of your digital transformation, you're already asking your end users to work in new and different ways with that technology. So it's a really organic shift for that to also be happening with training. So similar to the examples that you heard Alex just share, in just a regular everyday pre-COVID, post-COVID, in the future, you'll see just growing trends in training that we're going to account for and fit into your project, regardless of what format we're delivering in, whether that's in person or remote. So thinking back to our colorful, highlighted, squiggly road that we saw earlier, throughout that process, we're getting to know you and collect information on those key stakeholders, anyone who's impacted by this change, thinking deeply about, what different types of ways they're going to need to interact with technology and when they need training at which time. So as part of that process and that planning, we'll also be making considerations for, which technology platforms do we want to use? Would it be a live or recorded session, whether it's in person or remote? And also identifying where are those self-service opportunities, right? So early on, we saw that strong trend driving towards end users really wanting information at the point in time they need it, and not necessarily in a 1 or 2 hour training session 3 weeks before it's relevant to them, right? So we're thinking through these natural planning processes as we're getting ready for training delivery as it is, and just even more so with the changes that are taking place. So we're ready to deal with this type of kind of format as we grow and change. So one example is from a global professional services organization who did have in-person robust training at multiple locations around the world. So roughly 3 or 4 different countries, but they also had some remote, hard to reach places across different time zones. So we had to have a blended approach to meet those needs. So what we did is think through that training approach of tell, show, and do. So for in-person, all 3 of those took place at the same time. For the remote sessions, we took that do activity portion and just broke that out into a separate session so that those end users and the audience, the training audience at that time, they're getting the same information, but then they had a separate independent practice time set aside for them. So they could go through the needed scenarios, really get some experience in the system, and then also be able to call in and gain support, right? Reaching someone through the computer, or just dialing in through the phone to get that one-on-one assistance and support that they needed. So we're able to deliver the same content and the same activities, but just using different approaches that are going to meet the needs of the audience at the point in time that they're going to actually need that information. All right, so thinking back through our examples that we shared, a few that you may relate to as well, we have another question for you, our poll number 2. So of these techniques we've described, has your organization used any of these prior to March 2020? All right, and the poll is open on your screen. So I'll give you a moment to answer that. All right, our poll results are coming up here. Let's take a look. So yeah, we see very heavily in communications, right? Absolutely. Really encouraging to see that sponsorship and change champion network as well. And we see that training is really close to on par with communications there as well. So you're experiencing these changes. You're having to plan and think through these as well. And we're equipped to do that and partner with you also with our change management practices. Excellent. Thank you for answering that poll. So jumping back into our slides here, we want to leave you with a few best practices when delivering remotely. So judging by that poll, you've likely already had to make those adjustments, and then woven throughout the examples that we've spoken to for our webinar here, you've seen some of these best practices already. So essentially, it's the same best practices that you're using for in-person, but some of those minute differences may kind of come into play there, whether it's leveraging different technology, thinking through a realistic timeline to remain on target, and realistically measuring outcomes to see how that's going. At the end of the day, one of the most important things to consider is your audience. You know, what do they need? What makes sense for them? And finding what works, reusing that and building on it. So being efficient, being effective, and really carrying that through your project. So Collaborative does have resources available to you. Again, you'll see these links in the follow-up email that will be coming your way. So I'll hover here just so you can see at collaborativesolutions.com/virtual resources. There's an entire hub. A few areas to highlight is our newly revamped video library, where you can see some different organization change and training pieces that are applicable to different project phases. You can also locate some customer snapshots for some more examples. And then of course at the bottom there, the App Learn and Adopt partnership, they have a new series of information coming out as well. So that information will be available to you in the follow-up, and really just keep your eyes out for new information as it's released. All right, so before we get into questions, we want to leave you with a few key takeaways and final thoughts to kind of wrap up before we get into those questions.
Yeah, so just to close out, and we opened with kind of this same message, right, is we hope that you guys have, one, learned a little bit at this session, have some things that you can take away with you, but we also just want to leave you with some confidence and with a feeling that, one, we've talked a lot about our experience, Tammy's experience, my own, our colleagues at Collaborative, and how we've been delivering things remotely all along, and also some of the shifts that we have had to make in the past 2 to 3 months, just with the state of the world. But I want you to know it's not just our experience, it's your own experience. That last poll question, many of you replied and said, we've already done this. We've actually been doing this. Like, that's great that you guys are saying this, but yeah, we actually did do that before, just for a different reason. So you have an experience there, and we have that experience there, and that experience leads to success. There is past evidence of success in deploying systems, deploying digital transformations while being remote. It's something we have certainly done, and it's something that we believe every single one of our customers is capable of. And in that respect, our name is Collaborative Solutions. People make the joke all the time. Collaboration and partnership with our customers is really what we're all about. So our approach and our philosophy is partnering with each and every one of you, each of our customers, every company that we work with, every organization, school, government organization that we work with, and really understanding what are your needs and being your partner so that we can combine that experience, combine our prior success for both Collaborative and from our customers, and really drive your transformation forward. So if you walk out of here or log off from here with those 3 thoughts in your mind, as well as a couple of those strategies and a couple of those links to get to some of the more specific things, then I'll think that we've been successful in this past hour. And so with that, we'll open up for questions. I know Jillian has been monitoring the chat and everything, so I'll turn it over to her.
Great, thank you, Alex and Tammy. We did receive several questions, and for those of you who have not submitted a question, feel free to do that while we answer the ones that have already been in the queue. For the first question, it seems like you had already been working virtually. How do you help customers for which this is all new?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So we highlight how we've already seen that. And for some people, this experience and that shift might look a little differently for them, and especially their workforce as well. So one thing that we like to do early on, and that I know I've done on my projects as well, is calibrate with your team, right? So we see that shift happening. It's just a nice, simple conversation to have of, all right, so what meeting structure is going to work now? Let's think through those logistics. And do we need to have maybe more frequent, shorter meetings to help with, for example, some of our counterparts may have children home with them now just because of the setting that they're in. So maybe we need to have shorter meetings so they can take care of those responsibilities as well and still kind of meet our project tasks. So really normalizing that, right? You might have dogs barking in the background. There'll be different noise happening at home. Some people have to set up a computer in their house when they haven't had a home office before. So having those conversations of what's realistic, what's going to be most efficient, and also help us stay on track. This can also look like, breaking agendas into small repeatable bits of information, possibly recording information as well. So whether it's a meeting or just short videos that might be helpful to just kind of keep that moving as well. And also pushing our customers to those collaborative resources has been really helpful. And we've seen a lot of benefits coming from that as well. So really it's built in. We've seen an increase in doing that, but we've always had that built-in kind of process to check in with our teams and say, is this format still working for you? How can I better support you in, the information that we're trying to get across for the project?
Great, thank you. Okay, next question. Have you ever dealt with resistance on projects, especially with an increase in moving to virtual?
Yes, so resistance is definitely a natural part of change management that we need to think ahead about. And then also is, we heard earlier in this moving to virtually, you might see that change fatigue, that information overload. And even if someone doesn't want to be resistant, maybe that gets to be a lot as well. So really our first push in that type of situation would be to assess and dig a little bit deeper into the why that resistance is happening. So where is it coming from? Why is it happening? And how widespread, really? So we want to analyze, are we talking, a few people impacted, or is this just a really wide resistance that we're seeing? So first targeting those type of areas, and then from there thinking through, all right, so if we know the group, we know why this is happening, what are some beneficial messages that they're looking for? Do they have questions that need to be answered? And is the project sponsor maybe the one to answer those, or there's likely someone else in that, kind of space who's influential that we could help get some answers to and alleviate some of those concerns. So that's definitely something we think ahead about. We have lots of different readiness assessments for that type of situation. And with COVID-19 and the new normal, there's also just those opportunities to have a conversation, right? Or do a roundtable or a focus group or type of panel to dig into the deeper meaning of that resistance and really overcome it, and letting people know, it's okay to see that resistance. It's natural to feel that way, but how can we work together to overcome that and, over time, just start to feel better.
Thank you, Tammy.
Yeah.
Next question is in regards to training. How do you know if a training has been effective?
So similar to assessment on the last example there. So with training at all times, whether it's in person or remote, we're typically going to have a type of survey or feedback mechanism built in, right? So there'll be questions related to just the training content in general, and then possibly some organization-wide type of questions as well. So thinking through, the type of support they were able to receive. So could their questions be answered in time? Did they have an opportunity to practice? So we want to think through those pieces, as well as once you get that type of feedback from that survey, thinking of the volume of it, right? Are there 70% or more of the participants felt good about it and feel supported, or was there a large amount of participants who didn't feel supported? And maybe we need to have heavier remediation efforts there as well. So really thinking through those key pieces, what successful training looks like for each organization might also be different, right? Or if you have training that is on demand and happening at different points of time, kind of asynchronously, you might be getting that feedback in different ways. So even engaging your Change Champion network to give you some of that feedback from within the organization is also going to be helpful. And just to be flat out, quite a few of my counterparts have said, if we don't get a lot of tickets and questions, then we feel like it was successful. So it looks different for each organization, and we definitely plan ahead of time to capture that data and also make recommendations on using Workday Analytics to see what that adoption and interaction is looking like in the system from an end user point of view.
Okay, great. And one last question here that we have in the queue. For global organizations, how can you make sure you are reaching all employees at the right time?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Similar to some of the examples we saw as well, this can look different across the board. It really depends on the timeline and even the go live, right? So for example, as part of our end user assessment and change impact assessment, we're identifying which groups need a key message at a specific point in time. And that's just kind of a blanket overview of a typical communications plan. But we also want to think about different pieces of how that rollout is happening. So for example, maybe it's a global organization, but just North America is going live with maybe recruiting, and just those targeted groups need that specific information. Or maybe it's a phased rollout where certain locations are going live on one date and other locations, maybe a few months later, are going to have go live. So they don't need this communications as early as the first group might. So we need to think about the project timeline, the actual groups involved, and then another layer on top of that, similar to what we saw earlier for communications, is which method reaches that group best, right? So a lot of it may be virtual. Some of it might cascade down through managers as well. And we really need to also make sure the groups that might be harder to reach, whether it's, let's say, like a facilities group or a distribution center that might not typically have ease of access to regular types of communications, need to think through those pieces as well. So again, it's that analysis and conversation of making sure that we're hitting those needs and not just saying blanket statement, everyone gets the same communication at the same time, right? So targeted messaging to the right people, making sure it's just in time type of communication so it's there for them to use it when they're ready.
Okay, great. Well, that concludes our Q&A portion. Thank you, Tammy and Alex. And thank you all so much for joining the webinar. If you have further questions or would like additional information, feel free to reach out to us at digitaltransformation@collaborativesolutions.com. So thank you and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.